Welcome to this explainer. We're jumping right into a totally wild moment in history today. Picture this. Europe is just packed with old kings, powerful emperors, and these massive ancient empires. Everything is running on the old rules. And then, out of nowhere, this short, intense French general steps onto the stage and literally flips the entire board over. We're talking about Napoleon Bonaparte. Today we're going to trace the absolutely incredible rise and the dramatic, freezing fall of his empire. Let's get right into it.
The year is 1799. Now, to understand Napoleon, you gotta understand what France was going through at the time. They just survived the absolute chaos of the French Revolution. The old monarchy was gone, sure, but what replaced it was just exhausting instability. People were desperate for order. They just wanted normal life back. And into that huge power vacuum steps Napoleon. But he doesn't just promise them order. No, he promises them victory. Which brings us to a really huge question you should keep in mind here. France wanted order, but at what cost? Because that promise of victory, it wasn't going to stay neatly inside French borders. His ambition was about to spill over and completely redraw the map of Europe. Section 1. Stepping onto the stage and building the machine. So Napoleon takes power, and he doesn't just sit around enjoying the view. He gets right to work. He takes the French army and turns it into a literal machine. We're talking lightning-fast marches to completely outmaneuver the enemy and surprise attacks that caught those old-school generals totally off guard. But the real secret sauce? The psychology. His soldiers actually believed they were fighting for glory and for their nation. They weren't just pawns dying for a king they'd never met, and that is a massive advantage. And he takes this machine straight into Italy. Campaign after campaign, he's up against way bigger armies, but with that speed and those bold moves, he beats them. All of them. It sent a massive shockwave across the continent. Suddenly, Europe's rulers are sitting in their fancy palaces, hearing this one terrifying warning echo down the halls. Napoleon is coming. And honestly, it wasn't just a rumor. It was a promise of defeat. That takes us right to Section 2, the peak of empire. After Italy, he sets his sights on Austria. This leads to the legendary Battle of Austerlitz. The Austrian and Russian emperors look at the battlefield and think they see a French weakness. They think they've got him. But it was a trap, a flawlessly executed trap. He completely tricked these powerful emperors into walking right into what they thought was a weak spot, but was actually a concentrated wall of strength. It was just brilliant. After that, the dominoes just start falling. Kingdom after kingdom falls under French control or is forced to ally with them. By about 1810, the map is unrecognizable. Spain, Italy, parts of Germany, Poland, it's all under Napoleon's thumb. He's at the absolute peak of his power. But there's one holdout, one island that flat out refuses to kneel, the United Kingdom. And that stubborn defiance leads to Section 3, the fatal Russian gamble. See, Napoleon was a genius on land, but crossing the English Channel to invade Britain, not so easy. He tried cutting off their trade, but when that didn't bring them down, he made the biggest gamble of his entire life. He turns east. He marches into Russia with hundreds of thousands of soldiers. Just let that scale sink in for a second. The Grand Army. As they crossed the border, they looked totally unstoppable. Who could even put a dent in a force that massive? Well, the Russians knew they couldn't fight that machine head-on, so they use a brilliant but totally brutal counter-strategy. They just retreat. They refuse to give Napoleon the big, decisive battle he wants. And as they fall back, they burn everything: farms, villages, supplies. They leave absolutely nothing for the French to eat or use. They were just buying time, waiting for their deadliest ally to show up, the Russian winter. And then it hits. Just bone-chilling cold. A temperature that strikes that fast-moving French machine like a brick wall, bringing it to a dead stop. Then comes the hunger. With no supplies left to scavenge, hundreds of thousands of men are suddenly starving. It's no longer about glory. It's just a desperate fight for survival. And finally, the endless snow. Under the sheer, brutal weight of the Russian winter, the invincible Grand Army completely shatters. Which brings us to Section 4, Waterloo and the fall. When the shattered pieces of that army finally stumble out of Russia, the illusion is broken. The rest of Europe realizes something wild. Napoleon can actually lose. Sensing blood in the water, his enemies finally unite. The dominoes start falling the other way. Step 1, he faces a massive defeat at Leipzig. Step 2, he's literally forced from power and sent into exile. But he's not quite done. Step 3, he actually escapes, comes back for one final desperate roll of the dice. Which brings us to Step 4. At the Battle of Waterloo, he meets the Allied forces one last time, and he is defeated for good.
Let's wrap this up with Section 5, a legacy that reshaped Europe.
So, the guy who nearly conquered the world ends his life in exile on a tiny island, thousands of miles from any battlefield. But his shadow? It never really left. Even now, centuries later, he's one of the most studied military leaders in human history. He was a guy who rose out of a chaotic revolution, completely rewrote the map of Europe, and changed history forever.
Which leaves us with a pretty fascinating question to chew on. He took power by promising a broken France order, and he delivered a massive empire. But ultimately, what can we learn today from a man who tried to conquer the world, only to lose it all to the cold, quiet snow of Russia? It's an incredible story about ambition, strategy, and the absolute limits of power. Thank you so much for hanging out with me for this explainer. Keep asking those big questions, and I'll catch you next time.